Hey guys, welcome to a pretty special deck profile on TCG Buzz. It's Jacob, and I'm showing off my 72 Pillars deck. And you guys might notice something kind of interesting that my deck's sitting on. This deck was used in the first ever Shop Circuit tournament run by Bushiroad, and this was at Gnome Games in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I placed first, so I want to show off the deck that I used. First, I'd like to say that the tournament was, in fact, quite small. It was not a really giant tournament with a whole bunch of competitive players. It was somewhere in between being competitive and casual, and I think that's what Bushiroad was really going for with these tournaments. And I'd like to congratulate Gnome Games on, despite not pulling in a huge number of people, running a really nice tournament. Also, I promised some people in the Buddy Fight at the North America Buddy Fight group that I'd share that one of the prizes we received for this tournament was every time you won a round of the tournament, which we had 4, you got a promo card, any promo card you wanted from their promo binder. And they happen to have all of the golden promo cards, the Blue Dragon Shield, the Hero World card, and Cocytus Greed from the triple deck. So we have a whole bunch of those now. Thanks, Gnome Games. All right, so before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to TCG Buzz for more deck profiles, and leave me a comment letting me know what you think about the Shop Circuit in general. We're going to start with monsters, moving our way from size 3s down to size 0s. And I'm only running a single size 3 in this deck, and that's Champion Wrestler Asmodai. That's at 1 copy. Some people might be curious to know why I'm not running inverse third Omnilord Asmodai. Second Omnilord, sorry. Because I don't have any. That's my honest reason. And if I do get them, they have to be buddy rares, so it'll be a little while before I add them to the deck. That being said, the deck ran pretty smooth without them. Next, we have size 2s. Once again, only a single size 2, though multiple copies. Dance Asmodai. Dance Asmodai is he's awesome. He's size 2, all of his power, no defense, and 1 gauge call cost lets you draw a card. Just a really good card to keep the advantage train rolling. I really appreciate it. It doesn't synergize the best with the rest of the deck just because of the fact that, for the most part, I want to have 3 size 1s on the field at the same time. But as a starting card or just a card to use in a pinch, he's the best card in the deck. Then we have 4 copies of the buddy of the deck, Fervent Demon Lord Teacher Asmodai. And you will see right there, all 4 of them, buddy rares. Thank you to Christian. He provided these buddy rares. Actually, he provided most of this deck in a trade, so thumbs up for Christian. I also have to do that because he's editing this video. And the next one is the only other part of the deck that people might disagree with, and once again, it's because, honestly, I'm missing cards. So I wanted to run 4 copies of Art of Body Duplication Asmodai. Unfortunately, at this moment, I have 1. That's an issue. So I was looking for a good substitute, something that was decent that I could run until I get more copies, which I do have more copies on the way. They just haven't gotten here yet. I ended up going with Betrayal Expert Aunus, and it's a card that is actually quite similar to another card we'll see later, Street Racer Eligos, but with the fact that it isn't a counter call, but it can still return to the hand at the cost of a life, or it can go into the soul of a monster, which is not something that matters. And actually, it's a gauge instead of a life. So 3 copies of that, and as soon as I get my Art of Body Duplication Asmodai, that'll be out of the deck. Next, we have 3 copies of, like I just mentioned, Street Racer Eligos. It's a size 1 that I believe it was the first in the game that was a counter call. You could pay a life to call it as a counter, which you can use either to get yourself an extra attack on your turn, or use it as a meat shield to protect you on your opponent's turn. Additionally, you can pay another life when it's destroyed to return it to your hand, which is pretty nice. And, paying 2 life for that is kind of high, But as you'll see later, this deck has no issue with life. The next card we have is Decieving Shax. This is run at 2 copies. It's another size 1. When it enters the field, if there are 2 or more other 72 pillars on the field, you get to draw a card. Just, advantage again. And this card can really help in certain situations. Next, we have Demon Doctor Buer. This is a classic card, one of the first cards released for 72 pillars, and it is still absolutely a staple. This card is another size 1. It's a 1/1/3. Its stats are terrible, but it has one ability that is really unique. You can activate its ability to give yourself an extra gauge at the cost of having him die at the end of your opponent's next turn. So the thing with that is you can abuse this card so much. For one thing, you're gaining a gauge. If you put it in the center on your starting turn, it doesn't matter if it dies at the end of your opponent's turn. They're going to have to attack it and get through it anyways, in most cases. The other thing is you can always just return it to your hand after giving yourself that +1 gauge with some of these spell cards this deck runs. So you can gain a gauge, return it to hand, call a different size 1, or even call it again. Next we have Tiny Proffesor Crocell. Another size 1. I originally thought it was a size 0 just because it's so, tiny and cute. But it is, in fact, a size 1, and its ability is quite nice. When another card on your field is returned to hand, you gain a life. And that combos really well. Then, probably the most important 2 of, as you'll see, I'm running a lot of 2 of size 1s. This one is Demon Realm Architect Gamigan. It has a 1 gauge call cost and pretty bad stats. But when it enters the field, it lets you search your deck for a set spell and add it to your hand. This is really important. I run 2 different set spells in this deck, and just being able to get them out easier is always nice. That being said, if it wasn't 1 gauge as a call cost, if it, say, was a 1/1/1, I'd like it even better, but I understand why Bushiroad would never do that. Next, we have 1 copy of Boy Transformation Asmodai. This is the only size 0 in the deck. When this card enters the field, discard a card from your hand. If you do, return a card on your opponent's field to his or her hand. So this one's a little more situational than I like, but it's a size 0. It's pretty decent for a size 0. And it does return a card, which has synergy with the rest of the deck. But in many situations, returning a card to the hand isn't as beneficial as destroying a card. Something that, I guess, Teach Modai does much better than this card can do. But I still like running it, and it's just a fun card. All right, so I'm going to move all of our monsters out of the way, and we're going to move on to items. And this section is really easy. I run 1 item. I forgot the name. Sorcery Book Goetia. This card, I'm running at 3 copies. It's a card that can attack through your opponent's center, and if you have enough 72 pillars on the field, it gets a power boost and plus a crit. It's nice, simple, and it really helps out with a full field formation, and I enjoy running it. Unfortunately, only 1 copy is foil, and that does matter to me. Next, we're going to move on to spells, the heart of this deck, arguably the most important part. And we're going to start with the best spell card in the entire game of Buddy Fight. Nice one. 4 copies of the meme art, nice one. Very important. I really, really enjoy this card. I mean, why wouldn't you? You pay a gauge, draw 2 once per turn, no catches, nothing. It's just fantastic of a card, and I love it. Next, we have 3 copies of Emergency Ward Neverland. This is my favorite card in the deck. Whenever a card on the field is returned to its owner's hand, gain 1 life. Spam this with Little Proffesor on the field and return things to the hand, gain a couple extra life here and there, do it multiple times in 1 turn. You're looking at a lot of life. I've hit over 20, 25 life with this deck before. It's kind of ridiculous. And this deck definitely needs cards that synergize with that. So naturally, we have some spell cards that do return things to the hand. First, we're going to start with a classic. This is the reprint version of said classic. We have Magical Goodbye. Counter, return a size 2 or less on the field to its owner's hand. Really simple card, which that's all right by my books. And with Neverland on the field, you gain a life every time you return something. You can use it to stop your opponent's attacks, spam abilities from your own cards. It's got a lot of different uses. Then we've got another card, Good to Go. This one's kind of similar to Magical Goodbye, but it's limited only to size 1 or less. But when that card is returned to the hand, you gain a life, which with Neverland, you gain another life, which with Little Professor, you gain another life. See the synergy? So the thing with this, I've noticed I tend to use it more on my own monsters when they're going to be destroyed than I do on anything my opponent has on the field. Next, since this deck is kind of a gauge-heavy deck, we should focus on what we're gaining gauge from. I'm running 3 copies of Mind of Hardcore. You may only cast this card if you have 2 or more 72 pillars on the field. Put the top 3 cards of your deck into your gauge. You may only use this card once per turn. 3 gauge relatively easily. What more can you beat? You know, there's nothing better. I don't run Key of Solomon first volume as much as I run this card. You'll see Key of Solomon later, because I'd rather go with a 3 gauge situationally than a guaranteed 2 gauge, and I don't care about the counter. Speaking of cards with counters, though, we've got quite a fun card, probably one of the most salty cards out there. It will make your opponent salty. Great spell, Saturday Night, Devil Fever. This card, you pay 2 gauge, pay a life when you have 6 or more 72 pillars in your drop zone. Counter, choose up to 3 size 1 72 pillars from your drop zone and call them without paying their call cost. Return all cards from your drop zone back into your deck. So, why is this card important? First of all, it's a counter, so you're going to use it towards the end of your attack phase to get 3 extra attacks on your turn. And it calls them without paying call costs, so you can call your Teach Asmodai, which has a 2 gauge call cost normally, for free. And it's just all in all a great card, and the cost is not that much. Plus, as a little side bonus, you do return all your cards back to the deck, which can prevent deck out, which I've gotten close before. But also, it can be a good counter to Black Dragons. Then we have 2 copies of Key of Solomon first volume, just because this deck needs the gauge. It's a counter, gain 2 gauge. I don't think I've ever used it for the counter, but 2 gauge is always nice. Then we have a single copy of Never Say Never. This is another card that gains gauge. You gain 2 gauge, and then if you have no cards in your hand, you also get to draw 2 cards. It's incredibly situational, but I do run it at 1 just in case I need it. And even if I can't get off the second skill, it's still the same as a Key of Solomon. And then the last card we're running in the deck is a single copy of Bar King Solomon. Bar King Solomon is an incredibly situational card. It's a 1 gauge call cost, and when your opponent draws a card outside of their draw phase, they must discard a card. So it is situationally good against some decks. It's great against decks like Dragon Lords or other decks. I mean, it's actually great for a mirror match as well. Decks that do a lot of drawing, it can hurt, but roughly 50% of decks, it really won't affect them at all. I still run 1 copy in the deck. It's searchable using one of your monsters, and it's, in general, still okay to run. I've even played it knowing my opponent won't ever trigger it just because it's a 72 pillar that I can have out on the field to trigger other abilities. That does transition me pretty well into my sideboard, which I'm going to move the spells over, make a bit of a mess doing so. That's all right. We're going to move into my sideboard, and it is kind of interesting. I apologize, these cards aren't sleeved. I know what a filthy casual I am. I do run a second copy of Bar King Solomon in the sideboard because it's situational, but in that matchup where it actually is beneficial, it's really nice to have a second copy in the deck. And also, if I'm facing a deck that runs a lot of set spell destruction, just in case, I do run a second copy of Emergency Ward Neverland in the sideboard. It's probably overkill, but I like having that, especially since it's a key card for the deck. Also, we have a single copy of Good to Go in here as well. This is great if I'm to switch into the deck if I'm fighting a deck that runs primarily size 1s, for example, Adventurers. And if I'm fighting a deck that does a lot of burn damage, so I can gain extra life. Now we're going to move into the cards in the sideboard that are unique, that are not in the main deck. So we have 2 copies of probably Christian's favorite Magic World card, and honestly I kept it in because of him, because he loves this card and it's a troll card. But it is also a good card. Oops. I run 2 copies of Oops in the sideboard. It's pay 2 gauge, counter, return a monster, item, or I believe, monster, spell, or item to its owner's hand. So it is a good card. It can actually return size 3s, also items, also set spells to the owner's hand, and will still trigger Neverland. And that's why I like it. 2 gauge is quite costly. That's why it's not a main deck card. But it also counters a lot of your impact monsters really well as well. So that's why it's still in the sideboard. Then we have 2 copies of Chillax. This is my my hit hard, crazy impact monster counter card. There are so many impact monsters that are really good. Abigail, Vanishing Death Hole, Ball Smasher, that have attacks that cannot be nullified. Well, this reduces them, and I gain a life. So more life gain for me. And it has other situational uses as well, so it is in there. And I am happy to say that both copies are foiled. And then the last card is one that I would not expect to see in anyone's sideboards anytime soon for a 72 Pillars deck, just because of the current state of the meta. In my sideboard, I'm running 3 copies of 100 Demon Sorcery No Brainer. No Brainer is honestly not that good for a sideboard right now. There aren't that many big Soul Guard monsters in the game currently, at least in the meta. I did run it in this deck just because I figured there'd be some uses for it in my local scene. So that's why I'm running it, and for the most part, I'm right with that. But in a true competitive sense, I would run something like Magical Glue over this. Well, that's my entire deck. Please leave me some comments on how I can improve it. I think it's pretty solid, minus the cards it's missing. And I think I know what I'm doing with it. I think it's a really fun deck. I wouldn't say it's like tier 1 or anything like that. Tier 2 at best, but man, is it a fun deck to play. That's the reason I'm playing this deck, and I chose to play it. Not because I thought I was going to win if I used it or anything like that. I ran it because I had just built it using cards I'd gotten in a trade with Christian, and I was really excited to try it out. And you know what? It happened to win this tournament, but most importantly, I had more fun playing this deck than I had playing Buddy Fight in quite a while. So thank you guys for watching this video. Like I said, leave me a comment on the deck, like this video, subscribe, and let us know what other decks you want to see us do deck profiles of in the future. And I will see you guys next time.
We want to thank our sponsor, Frost Giants Games, for making this show possible. Frost Giants Games is Wisconsin's game store of choice for board games, Magic the Gathering, and other card games. Check them out at www.frostgiantgames.com.